Christmas has never felt the same to me since this happened. Even now, years later, when the streets light up and music starts playing in every store, there's a tightness that settles in my chest. A quiet warning. The kind that tells you something once went very wrong, and that it could happen again. At the time, I was 27 years old, raising my son Mark on my own. He was 5, curious, trusting, and still young enough to believe adults were safe by default. We lived in a house that had been passed down through my family, tucked into a quiet part of town where most of the neighbors were elderly couples who rarely left their porches. I still live there today, though the house feels different now. A few days before Christmas, Mark and I went out to do our shopping. It was one of those busy December afternoons when the mall feels louder than usual. We went from store to store, picking up clothes, gifts for family, and a few small things Mark begged for along the way. I even stopped at a hardware store to grab something for my dad. By the time we were done, both of us were exhausted. I took Mark to McDonald's afterward as a treat. Burgers, ice cream, sticky fingers, normal moments that felt comforting in their simplicity. When we finally left the mall, we exited through the south entrance, which was quieter and less crowded. That's where we saw him. A man dressed as Santa Claus stood outside the doors, waving at families as they passed. His suit looked professional enough, complete with gloves and a thick white beard. He called out cheerful greetings, his voice loud and practiced. When he noticed Mark, he crouched down to his level and smiled. "Hello there," he said. "What would you like for Christmas?" Mark tugged on my hand, stepping closer to him. I hesitated for a moment, but the man seemed normal, friendly, just another mall Santa. Mark told him he wanted a Nintendo Switch. Santa laughed and said maybe he'd get one if he stayed on the nice list. Then he looked up at me and winked. I smiled politely, already feeling slightly uncomfortable, but not enough to say anything. He stood up and made a comment to Mark about how pretty his mother was. Mark laughed, not understanding, and I forced another smile. Something about the way Santa looked at me felt wrong, but I brushed it off as awkward humor. We talked for a few minutes. Small talk about the holidays, crowds, and stress. I mentioned how hard Christmas could be as a single mom. He joked that even Santa needed help sometimes. Then he said something that made my stomach tighten. He asked Mark if he'd ever heard the song, "I Saw Mommy Kissing Santa Claus." Before I could react, he leaned toward me, tilting his cheek as if asking for a playful kiss. I leaned in slightly, planning to give an innocent peck on the fake beard. At the last second, he turned his head. He tried to kiss me on the lips. I jerked back just in time. The movement was aggressive, intentional. For a brief moment, his cheerful expression dropped. His eyes hardened, his smile tight and irritated. I grabbed Mark's hand and said we had to go. As we walked away, Santa called out "Merry Christmas" in a jolly voice, but it sounded hollow, like a line being read from a script. As we drove past the mall exit, I glanced back toward the entrance. He was gone. I didn't think much of it at the time. I wish I had. When we got home, I locked the door behind us and tried to shake off the unease. Mark and I curled up on the couch and put on a Christmas movie. For a moment, things felt normal again. Then the doorbell rang. I froze. It was late, too late for visitors. I told Mark to keep watching the movie and walked to the door without opening it. "Who is it?" I asked. A man's voice replied, cheerful and unmistakable. "It's Santa." My heart dropped. I told him to leave or I'd call the police. He calmly said I'd dropped something at the mall and he just wanted to return it. When I asked what it was, he said he didn't know, but if I opened the door, he could hand it to me. I refused and called the mall management office instead. What they told me made my blood run cold. They didn't hire any Santas. Anyone dressed as one was doing it on their own. I went back to Mark, trying to act calm, but my thoughts were racing. A few minutes later, I moved to the kitchen and lifted the blind slightly. Outside was pitch black. Then I heard it. Ho, ho, ho. It came from somewhere near the side of the house. I didn't look again. I called the police. They arrived, searched the area, and took a report. When they left, I still didn't feel safe. A few nights later, the doorbell rang again around the same time. Mark was already asleep. I turned off the TV and stayed upstairs all night. The next morning, I found a typed note taped to my door. It talked about me, about Mark, about how he knew where we lived. It said we had a connection and ended with his phone number. I called the police again. This time, They took it seriously. I never heard from him again. But every Christmas, when the doorbell rings late at night, I remember Santa. Some of my earliest memories are blurry. Faces fade, voices disappear, and moments blend together into vague impressions. But this memory has never faded. It stayed sharp and clear, like a photograph burned into my mind. Even now, decades later, I can still remember exactly how it felt to stand at the top of those stairs on Christmas Eve, believing in Santa and realizing I was very wrong. I grew up in a quiet suburban neighborhood in what most people would call a perfectly normal, middle-class home. Nothing unusual ever happened there. My parents were loving, my sister and I were close, and Christmas was always the highlight of the year. We counted down the days, circled catalogs, and argued over who would wake up first on Christmas morning. I must have been around 6 years old when this happened, because it was the same year we moved into that house. It was still new to us, still unfamiliar, with creaks and sounds we hadn't learned yet. At the time, though, I didn't think much of that. I was just a kid, and Christmas Eve was the most exciting night of the year. I could never sleep on Christmas Eve. The anticipation was unbearable. My parents would put us to bed early, insisting Santa wouldn't come if we were awake, but I always stayed up anyway. That night, I was in my bedroom playing a Star Wars game on my old boxy TV. The volume turned way down, so my parents wouldn't hear it from downstairs. I played until my eyes felt heavy. At some point, I realized I had to use the bathroom. I paused the game, turned the volume down even lower, and quietly opened my bedroom door. The hallway was dark, and the house was silent. I tiptoed to the upstairs bathroom, careful not to make a sound. Afterward, I was sneaking back toward my room when I heard something that made me stop dead in my tracks. A soft rustling sound. It was coming from downstairs. At first, I didn't understand what I was hearing. Then it clicked. The Christmas tree. My heart started racing. Every Christmas story I'd ever heard rushed through my head at once. Santa was here. I was actually hearing him in real life. Slowly, carefully, I crept toward the staircase. I didn't want to wake my parents, but I also couldn't stop myself. I needed to see him. I moved down a few steps, then a few more, until I reached the bottom. The living room was dark. The only light came from the Christmas tree and a small flashlight moving back and forth near its base. The rustling was louder now. Pine needles brushed against ornaments. Something clinked softly. I crouched slightly and peeked around the corner of the stairway wall. That's when I saw him. I could only see his legs at first. They didn't look like Santa's. He wasn't wearing red pants or black boots. He was wearing dark jeans. There was a large black bag on the floor beside him, already partially filled. Then he stepped out from behind the tree. He was just a man, a random adult man, standing in my living room. Our eyes met. For a second, neither of us moved. My brain tried desperately to make sense of what I was seeing. This wasn't Santa. He didn't look like Santa. He didn't feel like Santa. The man raised a finger to his lips and made a shushing motion. Then, in a quiet whisper, he said, "Yes, I'm Santa." That was the moment everything shattered. Even at 6 years old, I knew that wasn't Santa. Something deep inside me screamed that this was wrong, that this man wasn't supposed to be there. I screamed. I screamed as loud as I could, yelling for my mom and dad. The sound echoed through the house. The man panicked. I saw it on his face. He looked down at the bag, then back at me, clearly deciding what to do. He grabbed the bag, hesitated, then dropped it. He ran. He sprinted toward the front door and disappeared into the night. I don't remember if the door was unlocked or if he forced it open. I just remember the sound of it slamming shut. Seconds later, my parents came running downstairs. I was crying and pointing, trying to explain between sobs that there had been a man in the house. When they saw the black bag sitting by the tree, filled with ornaments and wrapped presents, they knew I wasn't imagining things. My memory gets fuzzy after that. Trauma has a way of doing that. I remember police lights outside. I remember my mom holding me tightly. I remember my dad pacing. Years later, I asked my parents what happened next. My dad told me he ran outside in his slippers, furious and ready to kill someone if he caught them. The man was gone. Half the ornaments had been removed from the tree and stuffed into the bag. Not just gifts, ornaments. Sentimental ones. Old ones. The police discovered the man had forced his way in through the back door with a crowbar. The wood was splintered and damaged. Apparently, another house a few blocks away had been broken into the same night. It was on the local news. Same method, same kind of theft. It was the same man. I don't remember much from when I was 6 years old. Most of that time is just fragments and feelings. But that night has never left me. The image of that man standing under our Christmas tree is burned into my memory. For years after, I was terrified of Christmas Eve. I slept with my door locked. I checked closets. I listened for every sound. Even now, when I hear someone say they saw Santa, part of me thinks of a flashlight moving through the dark. And I remember the man who tried to convince me he was Santa while stealing Christmas from beneath our tree. When my fiancé and I bought our house, we thought we had found the perfect place to start our lives together. It was December when we moved in, the kind of month where everything feels hopeful. Decorations were already going up around the neighborhood, and most of the houses on our street glowed warmly at night. It felt safe, familiar, normal. That illusion didn't last. We had been living there for a few years when this happened. It was December of 2020, and like most people at the time, we were spending more time at home than ever before. We knew our neighbors well enough. At least we thought we did. On our right lived a man named Paul. He was in his 40s, lived alone, and kept mostly to himself. When we spoke, he was polite but distant. Not unfriendly, just quiet. I saw Paul almost every day, usually leaving or arriving in his car. I assumed he worked regular hours, though I never knew what he did for a living. Then, one week in December, I realized something was off. His car hadn't moved. At first, I didn't think much of it. People work from home. People get sick. But after several days passed, it started to feel strange. His car stayed parked in the same spot, and his blinds were always closed. Every single one of them. What caught my attention most, though, were his Christmas lights. Paul had decorated his house early. Strings of lights lined the roof and wrapped around the porch. I actually thought it was kind of nice. A single guy taking the time to decorate didn't seem odd. If anything, it seemed wholesome. One night, as I was finally putting up my own decorations, I noticed Paul's lights begin to flicker. Not in a decorative way. All of them flickered at once, rapidly, like something was malfunctioning. I stared at them for a moment, expecting them to stop, but they didn't. They flashed erratically for nearly a full minute before returning to normal. The next morning, when I left for work, Paul's car was still there. When I came home later that evening, nothing had changed. Blinds closed. Lights on. That night, my fiancé mentioned that Paul's Christmas lights had started flickering again. I stepped outside and watched them glitch the same way I'd seen before. It didn't look programmed. It looked wrong. I decided to be neighborly and let him know. Part of me also wanted to check on him. I knocked on his door. No answer. I rang the doorbell. Still nothing. I stood there awkwardly, unsure of what to do, when the door finally opened. Paul stood there looking pale and tired. He smiled faintly when he saw me. I told him about his Christmas lights flickering. Almost immediately, they stopped. He said he hadn't noticed any issues and thanked me for letting him know. His voice sounded strained, like he was forcing normalcy. I asked if everything was okay, since I hadn't seen him in a while. He said he'd been under the weather. As he spoke, I heard something. At first, I thought my mind was playing tricks on me. Then I heard it again. A scream. It was faint, muffled, but unmistakable. A child scream. It came from inside Paul's house. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to ask him about it, to confront him. But fear froze me in place. I didn't want to accuse him of something I couldn't prove. I said goodbye and walked back to my house as calmly as I could. The moment I closed my door, I told my fiancée what I'd heard. Her reaction told me everything. I wasn't overreacting. We called the police. I told them I believed I heard a child screaming inside my neighbor's house. A neighbor who didn't have children. A neighbor who hadn't left his house in days. I asked to remain anonymous, though I knew Paul would probably suspect me anyway. The police arrived quickly. They knocked. When there was no response, they forced their way inside. I didn't see what they found. I only heard about it later. There was a young boy locked in Paul's basement. He had been there for 4 days. The boy had been kidnapped from another town. No one on our street even knew he was missing. He was dehydrated, terrified but alive. What shocked me the most was how he tried to get help. From a basement, he had somehow figured out how to mess with the electrical wiring connected to the Christmas lights. Whenever he saw movement outside through a partially blocked basement window, he caused the lights to flicker, hoping someone would notice. He noticed me at the door. That was his chance. If I hadn't knocked that night, if I'd ignored the flickering lights, I don't want to think about what might have happened to him. Paul was arrested and charged. I never saw him again. The house was eventually sold. New people moved in. The lights were taken down. But every December, when Christmas lights flicker unexpectedly, I don't think of decorations anymore. I think of a child trapped in the dark, desperately asking for help, using Christmas lights to save his life. I've always considered myself careful. I lock my doors, double-check windows, and don't take unnecessary risks. But after this happened, I realized how thin the line is between feeling safe and actually being safe. Sometimes, the danger isn't outside your home at all. Sometimes, it's already inside. It was the middle of December, and I was spending the weekend alone at my parents' house. They were out of town, and since I lived nearby, they asked me to keep an eye on the place. I didn't mind. The house was familiar, comfortable, and decorated for Christmas. The tree was up, lights glowing softly in the living room, filling the space with warmth. That weekend, my girlfriend Jenny came over to keep me company. We decided to make a night of it. Christmas movies, takeout, and wine. The house felt cozy and quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you forget the world outside exists. We started with the Polar Express, sitting on the couch beneath the glow of the Christmas tree. After that, we put on Elf. Somewhere between movies, we realized we'd finished the last bottle of wine. I offered to run down the block to the liquor store. It was a quick walk, maybe 10 minutes round trip. Jenny hesitated but agreed, joking that she'd guard the house while I was gone. At the store, I ran into the usual cashier, who always seemed eager to talk. We were mid-conversation when my phone started vibrating in my pocket. It was Jenny. Her voice sounded tense when I answered. She told me she kept hearing noises from below the living room floor. That immediately confused me. Beneath the living room was a crawl space, unfinished, cramped, and full of old boxes. I told her it was probably nothing. Pipes, the house settling, maybe even an animal. She asked me to stay on the phone until I got back. I agreed. The walk home felt longer than usual. When I got inside, Jenny was still sitting on the couch. The movie paused. She said the noises had stopped, but that she'd been listening closely the entire time I was gone. I tried to reassure her. I told her there were no openings to the crawl space from outside, no way for anything to get in. I opened the wine, and we resumed the movie. Less than 10 minutes later, we both heard it. A dull, heavy thud from beneath the floor. We looked at each other. This time, there was no denying it. Something was down there. I said it was probably an animal after all, maybe a raccoon or a stray cat that found its way in somehow. Even as I said it, my stomach twisted. The sound hadn't been light or skittering. It sounded deliberate. I paused the movie and went to the hallway closet where the crawl space entrance was hidden behind a small door. I grabbed a flashlight and opened it. The smell hit me immediately. Urine. Strong, unmistakable. I crouched at the top of the steps and shined the flashlight around. The crawl space was packed with boxes, old furniture, and random storage items. Shadows stretched in every direction. I didn't see anything move. I told Jenny it was probably an animal and that we'd need pest control in the morning. I messaged my parents in the family group chat and told my dad about the situation. He said he'd handle it. As I was climbing back up, something shifted in the darkness. I couldn't see what it was, but I heard it. Something moving across the floor, deeper in the crawl space. Panic surged through me. I rushed up the steps and slammed the door shut. We didn't open it again. We tried to continue the night like normal, but the mood was gone. When the movie ended, we went to my bedroom and eventually fell asleep, exhaustion winning out over fear. I woke up in the middle of the night with a pounding headache and an urgent need to use the bathroom. The house was silent. Jenny was asleep beside me. I quietly opened the bedroom door and looked into the dark hallway. At the far end of it, I saw a silhouette. A person. They were standing perfectly still. My heart slammed against my chest. For a split second, I thought I was hallucinating. Then the figure shifted slightly, and I knew it was real. I slowly closed the door and locked it. Footsteps followed. Heavy, slow steps approached the door. The doorknob turned. Someone tried to open it. Then a deep, unfamiliar voice spoke from the other side. "Hello." Jenny woke up screaming. I didn't try to calm her. I was terrified myself. After a moment, the footsteps moved away. I grabbed my phone and called 911, whispering as loudly as I dared. Waiting for the police felt endless. When they arrived and searched the house, they found no one. No broken doors. No signs of forced entry. Except for one thing. In the crawl space, there was a puddle of human urine. Whoever had been down there had been living there. Watching. Waiting. The police believed it was a homeless squatter who'd been hiding beneath the house for some time and slipped out before they arrived. That explanation didn't make it any less horrifying. I never forgot to lock a door again. And every time I hear a noise from below the floor, I remember the night I learned someone had been living under our house.